believed in ghosts until that apartment gave me no other choice. Have you ever felt like the home you live in knows you better than you know it? Not through a voice, not through a dream, but through the way it watches you, silently, day by day. My name is Rachel. In 2021, after a sudden divorce, I moved into a small apartment, Unit 3C, in the historic Alberta district of Portland. It looked like the perfect place to start over. High ceilings, wooden floors, sunlit windows, and this feeling of something old, but warm. But little by little, that peace began to disappear. It didn't start with noise, not with crashing things or flickering lights. It started with a tiny red light on my camera, a camera that had never turned on by itself before. Then came the scent, a faint perfume from someone I had never met. Then my cat started hiding, terrified of corners that had never been scary before. I used to explain everything with science. I used to believe every door that creaked open at night was just due to air pressure. I used to think that anxiety was what made me dream strange things, until someone else heard my voice when I hadn't said a word. This isn't a story meant to scare you. It's a reminder. That very first feeling, the chill you get in the dark. Sometimes, that's the only warning you'll ever get. Come with me on a journey into the apartment that didn't let me leave easily, because maybe you've lived in a place like that too, and never even realized it. I never believed in ghosts until that apartment gave me no other choice. Have you ever felt like the home you live in knows you better than you know it? Not through a voice, not through a dream, but through the way it watches you, silently, day by day. My name is Rachel. In 2021, after a sudden divorce, I moved into a small apartment, Unit 3C, in the historic Alberta district of Portland. It looked like the perfect place to start over. High ceilings, wooden floors, sunlit windows, and this feeling of something old, but warm. But little by little, that peace began to disappear. It didn't start with noise, not with crashing things or flickering lights. It started with a tiny red light on my camera, a camera that had never turned on by itself before. Then came the scent, a faint perfume from someone I had never met. Then my cat started hiding, terrified of corners that had never been scary before. I used to explain everything with science. I used to believe every door that creaked open at night was just due to air pressure. I used to think that anxiety was what made me dream strange things, until someone else heard my voice when I hadn't said a word. This isn't a story meant to scare you. It's a reminder. That very first feeling, the chill you get in the dark. Sometimes that's the only warning you'll ever get. Come with me on a journey into the apartment that didn't let me leave easily. Because maybe you've lived in a place like that too, and never even realized it. I moved in on a cold March afternoon. Portland was still drizzling, the sky a dull gray like it too had just gone through a breakup. Apartment 3C sat on the second floor of a red brick building from the 1930s, the kind of vintage architecture people like to call charmingly haunted. I didn't choose it for convenience. I chose it because it felt right. Exposed brick walls, wooden window frames with chipped paint, floors that creaked softly under your steps. The space felt like it wrapped around me, a 32-year-old woman trying to find herself again after a divorce, leaving the big city behind, carrying a gray cat and a few half-finished dreams. People always say, choose your home with logic, not emotion. I chose this one the moment I stepped through the door, before even looking at the rent. I didn't ask much about the apartment's history, didn't wonder who had lived there, didn't care why it had sat empty for 8 months before I arrived. That was my first mistake. The truth is, in many old neighborhoods in America, especially places like Alberta and Portland or the Mission in San Francisco, there are stories people still whisper. Something's off on the 3rd floor. That apartment on the left always gets returned within months, but most of us laugh it off. Partly because we don't believe it, mostly because we don't want to. My first week in 3C passed quietly. I stayed busy with freelance design work, arranging furniture, getting used to the comforting sounds, the soft groan of the wooden floors, the gentle rattle of the heater after midnight, and footsteps from the apartment above. Or at least, I thought that's where they came from. I played soft jazz, cooked with scented candles, and snapped photos of my kitchen to post on Instagram, like any young woman living an independent life in the heart of an old city. There was just one tiny, tiny thing that kept nagging at me. A small, outdated camera I'd placed on the bookshelf in my study. Its red light suddenly lit up. It had been off since I moved in. I hadn't even touched it. I figured maybe I remembered wrong. Switched it off. Told no one. But that was just the opening line. Soon after, things I couldn't explain started happening. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, like a leak behind a wall, quiet and persistent, leaving you unsure if you're imagining things, or if something really is watching you from behind the mirror. That's when I started noticing my personal computer. It would turn on by itself at 3 a.m., playing YouTube videos about topics I'd never searched for. I live alone. No one touches that device. I still remember clearly. That night, I shut the laptop down, closed the lid, and left it on the desk like always. Not plugged in, no system updates, no scheduled tasks or background processes. But that night, I was woken up by the light from the screen, glowing on the wall. A voice came from the study, slow, monotone, like those outdated narrations from poorly rated documentaries. The topic? An old news segment about summoning rituals in abandoned churches. I froze. I didn't believe in ghosts, or at least I hadn't, but I do believe in technology. And I knew. Computers don't turn on, and they don't launch YouTube videos without a command. So I tried to explain it. Maybe it was a software glitch. Maybe it was wake on LAN. Maybe the electromagnetic field got unstable because of the rain outside. I went online researching every possible explanation. Wake on LAN? Can't be. The laptop's not on Ethernet. Auto start after updates? That feature was turned off. A leftover tab reopening? When I shut it down, the only app running was Photoshop. And then I found a Reddit post from someone living in Chicago. They described their laptop playing music at 2:47 a.m., even though it was shut, only to later learn that the previous tenant had died in that very apartment and used to play that song on loop. Paranormal researchers have a term for this. Phantom technology, tech behaving as if guided by something else. Not a glitch, not AI, but something we don't fully understand. I shut the laptop down, unplugged it, and locked it in a drawer after that. But the feeling lingered, as if someone or something was watching how I reacted. Even stranger, a few days later, I noticed the laptop's camera light blink, just once, then go dark. I hadn't launched any app. Nothing was running. The scariest question wasn't how it happened. It was who or what was trying to reach out to me, and why. A few days later, just as I was starting to convince myself it was just a small glitch, the smell began. A scent I knew, but that didn't belong to me. Not from anything I owned. Not perfume, not cleaning products, not food. It was the smell of old cigarette smoke, pungent, harsh, and something deeply elderly, generational. What was strange? I don't smoke. Neither does my boyfriend. And no one who's visited ever brought that smell with them. It would appear on rainy mornings, or gray afternoons, when the hallway light dimmed. The first time I noticed it, I had just walked in after a long day. The smell hit me straight in the face, like someone had just taken a long drag and vanished into the air. I walked around the kitchen, checked the laundry room, sniffed the trash bags, all clean. But the scent lingered, woven into the air, settled into the old brick walls, the wooden door frames. Again, I tried to explain. Maybe someone smoked in the hallway, but I lived on the 3rd floor, all doors tightly shut. That's when I came across an article on something called residual hauntings. It's when emotions or behaviors from someone who passed away embed so deeply into a space, they leave traces behind. Like when you smell your grandfather's tobacco, even years after he's gone. In Japan, there's a famous story about an old house in Nagano. The tenants always smelled black tea and cigarettes. The two things tied to the elderly woman who lived there for nearly 40 years. She passed away in the kitchen on a rainy March day. I started to wonder, was there an untold past to where I lived? Was this not just a scent, but a memory, a message, a warning? My boyfriend suggested maybe it was an issue with the air ducts, but no duct system delivers cigarette smell on schedule, and only into my apartment. Every time that scent returned, I couldn't sleep. And I began to notice a strange pattern. The smell always came before other things happened. It was like a soft knock, letting me know it was still here. Max was a gentle dog. He'd been with me since he was a 6-week-old pup. He wasn't easily scared. He once slept through a full-on thunderstorm in winter. So that night, when Max suddenly started growling toward the hallway, I knew something was wrong.
At first, I thought he was just reacting to street noise, like he usually did. But this time, he didn't let it go.
Max didn't howl, didn't bark, just growled. A low, guttural sound from deep in his throat, eyes locked onto the darkness just beyond the bedroom door. I called him. No response. I turned on the light. The hallway was still empty. But Max didn't take his eyes off that one spot, as if he were tracking something that wasn't moving, and that something was staring right back at us. I started to feel like something was very wrong. Not a noise, not a smell, but a gaze. That spine-prickling feeling of being watched. Then Max backed up, crawled under the bed. For the first time in 6 years together, he refused to sleep in his own bed, the one right by my feet. And that's what chilled me the most. I remembered reading an article in The Atlantic about how dogs can sense micro-changes in electric fields, a phenomenon documented in several studies on supernatural occurrences in the UK, especially in so-called haunted houses that couldn't be explained by psychology. There was a similar story in Tacoma, Washington. A woman living alone had a dog named Ginger, who started growling toward the kitchen every morning at exactly 3 a.m., right when the fridge light flicked on without reason, and the power in the apartment glitched for a few seconds. The owner thought Ginger was sick, until she reviewed footage from her security camera. No one was in the house, but the light came on, and in the faint reflection off the fridge door, something was standing behind her. I started to wonder, was Max seeing something I couldn't? Or worse, was he trying to protect me from something I'd never understand? That night, I left the lights on. Max stayed pressed against me under the bed. He didn't sleep, and neither did I. That's when I heard the first sound. Not from the door, not from the hallway, from the living room. Footsteps, slow, dragging, like someone who didn't want to be heard, but also didn't have the strength to walk quietly. I remember that sound very clearly. It wasn't the firm thud of boots on hardwood floors. It was the kind of sound you only hear when someone frail is dragging their feet, or when a body that no longer belongs to this world is trying to move through physical space. I sat, frozen, my body tense. Max was still growling softly. The footsteps stopped, right outside the bedroom door. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on it, but it never turned. The next morning, I checked the living room floor, and I saw a single footprint in the layer of dust by the window, right in the middle of a room I cleaned regularly. Strangely, the print was at least 2 sizes smaller than my own foot, and didn't match any shoes I owned. Max couldn't have made it either. His claws don't leave a mark like that. I don't know what scared me more. The thought that someone had broken into an apartment with locked windows and doors, or that something didn't need doors or windows, and was still inside my home. In the days that followed, I started logging every sound, and I noticed a pattern. The footsteps usually appeared between 2:58 and 3:11 a.m., right around the time my computer had once turned on by itself, and Max always reacted before I could hear anything. I remembered a well-known incident that happened in Colorado in 2019. It was shared on Reddit and later featured on the podcast Unresolved Manifestations. A woman living alone in an attic apartment kept hearing footsteps above her every night at 3 a.m. She set up a camera and discovered a homeless man had been living in her ceiling for 2 months. But here's the strange part. That man claimed he also heard footsteps beneath him. So I began to wonder, was I hearing someone real? Or was it something that once walked these floors years ago? and what I heard was just an echo of its memory. Many researchers call that a residual haunting, a phenomenon where energy repeats moments that once happened in a space, like a recording playing over and over again. If that's true, then who once walked here? And what do they want me to see? I started losing sleep. Every night I lay awake waiting to see if the footsteps would return. And then, one night, I wasn't the only one who heard them anymore. That morning, I'd barely slept all night. Dark circles under my eyes, I went down to get the mail, trying to live normally, even though unease was clawing at my chest. I walked past the ground floor restaurant, a small Mexican place that stayed open late every night. Mr. Miguel, the owner, a kind man in his 50s who usually just nodded as I passed, called out to me that day. "Emily, have you ever seen anything strange in that apartment?" The question froze me. Not because he asked, but because he used the exact word I'd been avoiding. Strange. I forced a smile. "I think it's probably just an old apartment, that's all." Mr. Miguel looked at me for a long moment, then quietly shook his head. "No. The tenants before you, some of them said the same things, and a few of my staff actually quit.
They said something wasn't right upstairs.
He told me that a few years back, the person who lived in 3C was a solo artist. He used a Ouija board to communicate with artistic inspiration, but then started having severe insomnia, hearing whispers from the bathroom, and eventually left in the middle of the night without warning. He left all his stuff, and a handwritten note taped to the mirror. I am never alone, and that's the worst part. One of Mr. Miguel's cooks once claimed they heard a child giggling from the ceiling after the restaurant had already closed, and food that had been neatly set on a table suddenly fell to the floor without anyone touching it. Back in my apartment, I started digging deeper. I found that some researchers in the field of energy imprinting believe that intense emotional activity, like prolonged grief, isolation, or fear, can leave behind a kind of chaotic energy trapped in the space itself. It's like walking into a room and just knowing something terrible once happened there, even if no one ever tells you. I began to understand. Maybe I wasn't being haunted by one specific spirit. Maybe I was living inside a loop, a repetition of emotions that had once lived here. The fear of whoever came before was now becoming my reality. That night, as I took down the wind chime from my window, because it kept ringing for no reason, I remembered something I'd once read in a book about hauntings. It's not that the place is haunted, it's that the place remembers pain. I don't know why that night was different. Maybe it was because the apartment was too quiet. So quiet I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. Or maybe it was because Max, the dog who was always alert, suddenly curled up and stayed completely still the entire evening, eyes locked on the bedroom door. Or maybe it was because I had finally stopped trying to deny it. It was 2:17 a.m. I had just turned off the light and laid down when I heard it. A sigh. Not mine, not Max's. A sigh. That seemed to come from the corner of the room, the one place the light never quite reached. I sat straight up. I listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No wind. Just silence and waiting. I whispered, "If someone's here, I don't mean to intrude. I'm just living here. I'm not trying to replace anyone." And then a sound answered. 4 knocks. Slow. Clear. Like someone lightly tapping wood with their fingernail from inside the wall. I had never been that terrified, but I'd also never felt that calm. There was a strange sensation washing over me, that I was finally being seen, being heard, being known. The apartment was no longer just a place I lived in. It became a place I was sharing with something. A memory, a grief, a restless soul. I remembered something I once read about shared hauntings, where the living, unknowingly, deeply empathize with the lingering energy in a space. Not being haunted in the traditional sense, but becoming a part of the emotion that was never resolved. The one carrying hurt from a sudden divorce, the loneliness, had opened the door to that feeling. Max still wouldn't take his eyes off the door. I stood up and walked into the hallway, step by step, breath by breath. I felt like I was walking through someone else's memories. I saw it clearly. This apartment wasn't malicious, but it was sad. It was hungry. It needed someone to feel it. And I had done that for too long. As I passed the mirror, I thought I saw a second figure behind me. I turned. Nothing. But this time, I didn't check the rest of the house. I didn't go searching like I always did. I just went back to my room, packed what I needed, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll leave." I thought leaving would feel like walking out of a nightmare, relieved, at peace, free. But the truth is, it didn't feel that way. The next morning, I didn't pack much. Just a rolling suitcase, a few personal items, and Max, still clinging close with every step, as if afraid I might change my mind. I didn't look back at the apartment, didn't lock the door 3 times like I usually did. I just walked out, quietly, as if I never really belonged there. But the thing I didn't bring with me was the very thing that kept following me. That feeling. The chill down my spine whenever I heard water drip in the middle of the night. The sudden footsteps in the hallway, even though I was now living somewhere completely new. The doubt that maybe I had left a part of myself behind in 3C. Or worse, a part of 3C had come with me. There was one time, in my new apartment, miles away where the morning sun always flooded in, I still jolted awake at 2:17 a.m., the exact same time as those last knocks. Max woke too, ears perked up, staring at the door like he was waiting for something. I walked to the kitchen and saw a coffee cup I never took out, sitting neatly on the table. In an old book about memorialized houses, the author wrote, "Memory doesn't live in people, it lives in space. And sometimes, when you stay too long in a space marked by grief, you carry it with you like a smudged ink stain that never quite washes out." I'm not sure if I believe that, but I do know this. There are places, no matter how far we move, that never fully leave us. I used to think I was just renting apartment 3C, but the truth is, it also rented me. It rented my time, my emotions, even fears I thought had long gone to sleep. And now, no matter where I am, whenever I hear wind slipping through the cracks or a wind chime softly ringing, I remember that place. And if you've ever lived somewhere that made you become a different version of yourself, you'll understand this feeling. You bring a shadow with you, undefined, unnamed, but always there, quietly, persistently, like the scent of old cigarettes in a memory. After leaving apartment 3C, I started to wonder, were all the things I experienced real? Or were they just born of imagination, lonely nights, stress, and unspoken grief? I used to be someone who believed in logic. I didn't watch horror movies. I didn't touch Ouija boards. I didn't believe until I found myself living inside the story. But looking back, I can't help but ask myself, was I just psychologically affected? I'd gone through a divorce. I'd lost my sense of safety. And maybe apartment 3C was just a place where sorrow had room to echo like a voice in an empty cave. But then, I think of Max, the dog with no history of anxiety. Yet he growled at the dark. He barked when no one knocked. And every time that happened, I couldn't deny it wasn't just me who felt it. In a study on residual hauntings at Durham University, UK, researchers found that many people who experienced strange phenomena in their homes had no history of mental illness. Instead, they lived in spaces once filled with emotional trauma, loss, abuse, suicide, things that don't leave, but linger like echoes embedded in walls. Maybe I'm one of them, not crazy, just someone who lived too close to a memory that wasn't mine. The biggest mistake I ever made was thinking every strange thing could be explained by tech, logic, or fatigue. But there were nights when there was no sound at all, and I still felt someone standing by my bed. And that couldn't be random. I began to read, research, compare, from Reddit threads to old books on hauntings to stories from others who had been through the same. They all said the same thing. You don't need to believe until you live through it. And by the time you believe, you're no longer sure what to call it. So, was it real? Or just my mind trying to give shape to loneliness? I don't have a final answer. But I do know this. Feelings are nin, and sometimes a presence you can't name is the strongest proof that something beyond words is still here with us. If I could go back to that afternoon, the first time I stepped into apartment 3C
took a deep breath, and said, "This is it. This is the place I've been looking for." Maybe I would have stayed quiet a little longer and listened more deeply, not just with my ears, but with my intuition. I wish I had asked the neighbors, like Mr. Howard downstairs. Just one simple question. Has anything strange ever happened here? Maybe I would have learned sooner about the previous tenant, the one who used a Ouija board right there in the bedroom. Maybe I would have understood why the last renter always left a nightlight on, even in the middle of the day. I wish I had paid attention to the little things, like the wind whistling through the doorframe, even when it was completely still outside, like the wall clock that stopped ticking the moment I heard that first whisper, or the look in Max's eyes, that dog I trusted more than myself, always avoiding the left side of the hallway. And more than anything, I wish I had trusted that very first feeling, the sharp tug in my gut the moment I walked in. Something here isn't right. But like so many others, I brushed it off as nerves, just part of starting a new chapter. I believed in the sunlight pouring across the wooden floor, believed in the dream of independence after heartbreak, and I forgot. Some places look perfect, but were never meant for peace. A mistake I made, and one many others do too, is choosing a home based on emotion, on lighting, on design, and forgetting to check its emotional history. Old walls can be repainted, but the energy that once lived there isn't easily erased. It won't show up in paperwork. It won't be listed in your lease. It's in the footsteps at 3 a.m., in the sudden chill running down your back for no reason. There's a line from a journal I once read, written by someone who lived in a so-called haunted home. Some apartments only rent you the space, but they keep your soul. And I share this story, not to scare you, but to remind you, every space holds memories. And you have the right to choose where your memories will live.